Hi, this is John Rowell for the Rowell Report. Today is Monday, September 22nd, 2025, and the question of the day is whether we're closer to World War III today than we were yesterday, or is anything changed? And definitely you can see the drumbeat of war going on in the UN, in the media, in declarations made by Kaya Kallas, by van der Leyen, and the announcement of the 19th sanctions package affecting Russia. And we've seen that in the in all sorts of commentaries by different media generals, these retired U.S. generals who show up and they're always blaming Russia for every problem in the world and saying that the solution to fixing all the problems in the world is that we all have to join together and attack Russia. So, anyway, if you know a little bit about the history of Russia, you'll know that the U.S. was heavily involved financially and politically. Once the Soviet Union fell, it basically became a dysfunctional state. It was bankrupt financially. The military, which had been one of the strongest in Europe for the Soviet Union, suddenly was broken up into different countries, and they had no financing. Their military equipment began was starting to get rusty, um, and their soldiers were not getting training. A lot of corruption came into the country. A lot of the oligarchs began to appear and to take over. So this was the closest moment that the Western countries had of capturing Russia as a political entity. But for some reason or other, they got through it despite all the corruption in the Yeltsin government. And from what I understand, MI6 put President Vladimir Putin in office, or basically he was kind of handpicked. And at the beginning, he was looking for solutions of how Russia could work with NATO, and they could try to re energize the instruments that the Western countries had with the Soviet Union to de escalate and to maintain peace. But anyway, the Western countries saw Russia as a weak state, bankrupt, had really no voice in the matter, no vote. So they were just plugging away, picking up new NATO countries from the ex Soviet republics, and it was all looking very bad for Russia. Um, and they uh, invested billions into Ukraine since 1995. Ukraine was considered basically a de facto NATO EU country, and they worked very hard to build up their military, build up their educational system, which would put out a pro Western, anti Russian narrative. And so that worked until 2008, when uh, President George Bush, the man who stood on the aircraft carrier and said we won when he had lost, um, so he came out with another stupidity, which was to say that NATO was going to be in Ukraine. Ukraine would be a NATO country. He tried to force that through along with Georgia, and they both were failures. They failed big time at that time. And then this was like a wake up call for Russia. So they said, hey, we have to stop NATO. We have to have a buffer zone. Ukraine makes a ideal buffer zone. And then the conditions started to worsen until the civil war started in Ukraine in 2014, and they did everything they could um, to alleviate the situation, to unite the ethnic Russian people with the nationalist Ukrainians, but the nationalist Ukrainians were not having anything to do with that. And in 2019, Ukraine put out a law basically eliminating Russian from just about every sphere of public life and commercial life. Of course, you could speak it in your home if you like. Um, but basically Russian was outlawed just in really every sphere. They eliminated any media that was in Russian. They began to shell um, ethnic Russian cities like Donetsk on a daily basis. A lot of civilians died. Anyway, um, the last opportunity to avoid war in Ukraine was 2021, and Russia tried to reach out to the Biden administration to come up with some agreement, and the Biden administration was very hostile to Russia. And in the end, they said that they would not commit to not placing strategic nukes in Ukraine, and that was the last straw. So anyway, Russia went in. So basically, the beginning of the war in Ukraine, the Ukrainian military was bigger than the Russian force that was in Ukraine. They were better equipped. They were better trained. They had better military direction. And for the first 9 months of the military conflict, the Russians looked lost until they started to get their feet on the ground, and so the Russian military started to uh, really energize and to become even with the Ukrainians. And then over time, the Ukrainians, their military numbers started to fall, and the Russians started to increase their military size, their artillery. They started to outdo Ukrainian drones, and they began to do the missile strikes. They began to take out important infrastructure in Ukraine that they needed for their military operation. So anyway, um, this was all, but it was still looking like all Ukraine needed was this special super weapon or this special super strategy, and they would push Russia back to the 1991 border. So, anyway, for a time, the Western countries were, they were all giddy and happy, and they could say that it's just a matter of time. Russia's going to collapse politically, economically. They put on more sanction packages, and they were sure that everything they were going to do was going to have an effect. But needless to say, the one thing they didn't count on was the resilience of the Russian people and of their ability to adapt. We know that at the beginning of World War II, the Russians were severely behind the Nazi Germany in just about every category in military strength, in their weapons, in their tanks, but in basically a few short years, the Soviet military got even with the Nazi Germany and then jumped one step ahead of it, and then the Nazi Germany is started to slowly collapse, you know, army by army and location by location until they were starting to be pushed further back, and then the Soviets were at speed, and then the Nazi Germany force could never recover from that. So um, that was the resilience of the Soviet people, especially the Russian people, and so the Western countries, they were looking at Russia like it was 1991 after the collapse. Basically, an oil, an oil pump with a gas station and with nukes. That was pretty much the idea of John McCain of Russia. and they just put their blinders on, and they decided they're not going to see anything other than that. So um, anyway, then we get to the point where Russia is starting to turn the tables on Ukraine. It's starting to pick up territory at a faster pace. The Ukraine military, on the other hand, they're running out of soldiers, they're running out of military equipment. Their factories where they're building military equipment is being destroyed. The United States has stopped providing large amounts of military equipment, in part because they don't have it. So if they don't have it, they can't send it. And so this is starting to worry the Western countries. And they decided that it was time to come up with simulate um, Russia aggression against NATO countries. So the first thing that I think that pointed out that they were going in this direction was this GPS attack or morphine on the plane that was carrying van der Leyen from over to, I think, Bulgaria. So anyway, they came out this story that the Russians attacked the plane carrying van der Leyen, and so they said they were circling in the air for an hour, and they were using, paper maps. And so then there was one of these social media experts, not experts on social media, but an expert on aviation who's on social media, and he basically reported that there was no GPS. The GPS was a constant in the flight from the beginning to the end. The flight did not circle in the air for an hour. It was about 9 minutes late. And then, if we take a look at the plane has a backup system, which is a series of digital maps which it can use. And these are kind of the technology that's maybe 20, 30 years old, but it's still valid to use. And there's no paper maps in the plane. So all these narratives that van der Leyen was putting out and were starting to fall. And then she said, "No, it wasn't us. Wasn't us that said it. It was the Bulgarians who said it." And the Bulgarians said, "Oh, we don't know anything about that, and we're not going to put out a statement." So it basically came out that that was a bogus um, accusation. And then we started to get about the drones in Poland, which was another bogus accusation. These were basically some foam drones which were in really bad shape. Some were duct taped together, and we were supposed to believe that even though their range is around 700 kilometers, that some of them had gone 1,400 kilometers and damaged and duct tape and all that. Um, and there was a house that supposedly was attacked by one of the drones, and then we found out that it was a missile that had dropped out of a Polish F-16. So that sounds like something that we would kind of not expect to happen, and but anyway, they took all these different things and they put together this narrative about Russia, Article 5 attack on Poland with foam, with duct tape foam drones. But these dummy drones, which Russia uses, you put them in you send them up and put them ahead of the real drones, and this is to kind of absorb all the air defense. So anyway, they just circle around, and because the idea is they're trying to get hit with the air defense, and if they're not hit with air defense, eventually they will run out of fuel and they will just fall somewhere. So basically, they collected a bunch of these, put them in the back of a pickup, drove across the border, and put them in in different fields, and they wanted us to believe along with the missile that dropped out of an F-16 onto a home. Um, that that this was a Article 5 attack on Poland, and then um, they put that to a vote in the United Nations, and the people said, "Blah, no, nah, this is just another one of those crazy stories we're getting out." And then they came up with this story of the fighter jets. So the fighter jets, excuse me, the fighter jets that have been going between Kaliningrad and Russia for since 1991, as Russia and not as the Soviet Union, as Russia. They've been making regular flights, and Russia also has planes, passenger planes that fly from Moscow or St. Petersburg to Kaliningrad, and they fly, and they call this airspace neutral airspace. And on the other hand, Estonia, whose um, whose border extends out 12 nautical miles from Estonia, that meets up directly with Finland's um, border, which extends out 12 nautical miles. So, since there isn't a space that is not either Estonia or Finland, and planes have to transit through that corridor, they call that neutral airspace, and it's internationally recognized. But they decided that since there have been thousands of flights going from Russia to Estonia, that this was a time to pull out of the hat the idea of Russia going through Estonia's airspace. So I want you to think about that a moment, because this is just a pattern. We've seen that they're building up to something. I don't know what it is. A lot of people now are talking about or telling Estonia or any of the Baltic countries, if a Russian plane comes through, you're supposed to shoot it down. Okay, they shoot down a plane, they're gonna get hit. So I can assure you that if Estonia sends up planes, obviously not their own planes because they don't have an air force, but whatever country sends up planes, if they shoot at a Russian fighter jet, the fighter jet is going to respond, and this will escalate the conflict. So anyway, um, I think we can expect more escalations. And why is all the escalation going on? Because Ukraine is collapsing. They're collapsing politically, they're collapsing economically, they're collapsing militarily. They they have military experts, Ukrainian military experts, going on these programs that talk about, you know, these conferences about Ukraine and defending Ukraine, and they're saying that they're still looking for a strategy, and they're talking about drones, and they're talking about this, and they're talking about that. The key thing for Ukraine right now is they don't have the soldiers, they don't have the artillery, and if you know that in combat, the current combat, 80% of the casualties are coming from the artillery, and Russia has 6 or 10 to 1 advantage. Oh, okay, I know that uh, Ukraine still has a sizable military, and we really don't know how big it is or how many soldiers are left. But we know that their car is going down the highway, and the gas tank that was on full in 2022, uh, and over time has started to move its way to empty. Right now, it's probably somewhere between a quarter of a tank and empty, because when they start to run out of soldiers, what's going to happen is they're going to be shored up in a couple locations on the front, but other areas are going to start to see the Russians advance a lot. So anyway, these fire brigades that they have, what's called the Azov battalion, They're going to shift them from one part of the front to the other, and to try to slow down the Russians. And as they're being shifting from one place to another, they're going to be liable to be hit by drones, and the Russian drones are getting better and better, and they're taking out more and more of the Ukrainian vehicles. Of course, Ukraine has set up these netting in a lot of spots, but the Russians will collapse it either with one of those Geron drones, or taking a direct missile strike on some target that's underneath the netting. So anyway, this is not looking good for Ukraine, and the European countries know that. So what they want to do is they're saying you have to halt the conflict now on the line of combat, because so many people are dying, or whatever. They'll come up with an excuse. Anyway, we know that Russia is very aware of the military situation in Ukraine. Of course, anytime the Ukrainian soldier, um, runs away from the front line, is captured by the Russians, they will get intelligence from that individual. So they have a pretty good idea of what the situation is with the Ukrainian military. They know what their force size is, and over time, Russia is focusing on exhausting Ukraine, hitting their military equipment and their soldiers with artillery, with drones, with missiles, with every kind of firepower they have. And as Ukrainian military dwindles in size and in equipment, the attempts to create a diversionary tactic, like trying to escalate the conflict between Russia and the European countries, will grow greater and greater and greater. So when that happens, Russia will respond to the European country, and then the United States will come in. And we know Donald Trump. He doesn't like to be pushed around. He likes to be the one pushing people around. So they will come to him. The people from Fox News, Lindsey Graham, all the senators, Mike Johnson, and they will say, the United States has to be strong and protect democracy and human rights, and we have to stop them now. So the United States could enter the conflict, and then this could go anywhere. And as you know, the United States has basically exited any nuclear missile pact. There's just one left, the START Treaty, which expires in 2026. So, and they don't seem too interested to renew that. So this could escalate very quickly, and we could see tactical nuclear weapons used. But I don't think we're at that point yet. I think what we're going to have is just escalating animosity, and we'll see that in the UN, in the media, and we'll see that in all these conferences and interviews. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to gather the popular support of the people for some aggressive action against Russia. And as you know, some of these countries are in dire economic straits. So the people in these countries are angry at their politicians. So what the politicians want to do is channel that anger towards Russia, and they may be successful in doing that. But anyway, I think that saner minds could prevail. But we basically have European Union, we have van der Leyen, Kaya Kallas, and then we have NATO, Mark Rutte. We have the bulk of the NATO countries with any leadership, like the UK, France, Germany. They're all looking for someone to focus the anger of the people on, because their countries' economies are in terrible shape. And so, anyway, I would say that we are closer to World War III than we were yesterday, but right now we're just at a verbal level. I would expect that in the future the European countries will continue to try to provoke Russia, to provoke an attack from Russia on a European NATO country. Uh, as the Ukraine military continues to collapse. And there's still people um, who say that Ukraine can win. All they need is more, money or military equipment, and this is insane. So um, they have to decide either Russia is a weak and poorly run military that it doesn't create fear, so NATO has nothing to worry about, or they have, or the fear factor is back, and Ukraine is going to collapse. But they don't want to say that Ukraine is going to collapse they because then why send money and arms to a country that's already lost? So they have to keep up this double talk, at least until it becomes totally obvious that Ukraine is just collapsing, like, in slow motion. So anyway, I I would expect that in the future we will see more of these MiG jets in Estonia airspace, and we will see now NATO planes harassing Russian planes as they go from Russia to Kaliningrad, and then we could see some strong warnings from President Putin to those countries. So, anyway, the European countries or the NATO countries are starting to organize in kind of a block, and they're going to slowly try to find a way to anger Russia, like trying to close off the Baltic or close off the Gulf of Finland, or to stop the uh, oil transport ships, which they call the Shadow Fleet. So, anyway, we can expect more to come. So, but for the moment, I would just stay tuned. I think the I think the acrimonious verbal attacks will continue, and Russia has been very prudent in its verbiage towards these countries. So for the moment, Russia is not responding in kind, and I think these attacks will stop after a couple of days. But I'm sure that they will continue to look for more and more provocations to try to get. What they need is they need a provocation every week or every 3 or 4 days, and then they can keep it in the news and say that Russia is escalating. Russia is starting to show aggression towards NATO, and they come up with all these narratives. Anyway, that is my report for today. I hope that you liked it. If you liked this video, please hit the like button and subscribe. I look forward to seeing you on more videos here on the Rowell Report. And leave a comment below. And thank you for joining me today. Thanks for supporting independent journalism. Have a good day.